Okay, hi, this is Matt Stolick, professor of philosophy, and welcome to the third annual Religious Studies and Philosophy lecture. Title of this year's lecture is, If You Can Drink a Beer, Then I Can Smoke a Joint, Equal Rights and the Legalization of Marijuana. I'd like to say that our department lecture series is meant to showcase the work of our 5 full-time faculty members to engage with current events and issues. I appreciate my colleagues respectfully encouraging me to present on such a controversial topic. And thank you, University of Findlay, for providing a place for intellectual exploration and academic freedom. This evening, I humbly take on this argument that's been made for almost 80 years of marijuana prohibition. There are many who've sacrificed to see this day, including the country's 3 oldest drug reform organizations, Marijuana Policy Project, Drug Policy Alliance, and the National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORML. I appreciate their sacrifice and honor their work. I come as a philosopher trained in applied ethics and philosophy. I've always thought the argument for legalization of marijuana was clearly a winner, morally speaking. Last time I presented, October 3rd, 2013, Medical Marijuana, Effects, Empathy, and Ethics. After the lecture and into the Q&A, I have a clear and distinct and cherished memory. An anonymous man in the crowd yelled, "Let's put it on the ballots." I like to think it was the eminent Terry Cook of Findlay, Ohio. Years of such great letters to the editor of the Courier. "Well done, sir. You serve a very important purpose in Findlay, Ohio." And now here we are, with issue 3 to be voted on in Ohio in a week, legalizing marijuana for medicinal and recreational purposes. Back in March 2009, I presented Otherwise Law-Abiding Citizens, a scientific and moral assessment of cannabis use. Not much interest, lack of organization in Ohio, brownie jokes, laughter, the old quip, "Will there be free samples?" Politically powerful conservatives fluff it off, and no serious discussion, just humoring me. But equal rights are no laughing matter, and the scientific facts about this plant will not go away. Now in 2015, what's happening in Ohio is happening all over the United States. A revolution. Unjustified marijuana prohibition is coming to an end. One primary source tonight is the quarterly newsletter of the International Association for Cannabinoid Medicines, or IACM, the IACM News. And I've been a member of the IACM since 2007. Also, I use their journals, Journal of Cannabis Therapeutics and Cannabinoids, and all issues of both these journals are available online. And new in the fall 2015, Cannabis and Cannabinoid Research, a new online journal dedicated to the scientific, medical, and psychosocial exploration of clinical cannabis, cannabinoids, and the biochemical mechanisms of endocannabinoids. I also want to introduce a great book, Cannabis and Cannabinoids, Pharmacology, Toxicology, and Therapeutic Potential by Franco Grotenherman and Ethan Russo as editors in 2002. A second book I wanted to mention is Lester Grinspoon and James Bacalar's Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine. Here are presented, among other things, various diseases for which there are no known cures. And there are real patients who testify to therapeutic benefits for each of these diseases. A third book, a great book about pharmaceutical companies and how they have taken over medicine, is Antonio Escohotado's Brief History of Drugs from the Stone Age to the Stoned Age. And as you'll see, I use several other books and journal articles for this presentation. So in July 2015, in the United States, most citizens say that cannabis is safer than alcohol. 53% answered yes to the question, should marijuana use be legal? According to nationwide polling data by CBS News. 43% oppose legalization. This is the highest level of support ever recorded by CBS polls. And you can see by this graph, do you think marijuana should be legal or not? how far this issue has come. So around 2010, you can see it's about 50-50, and now 5 years later, there's more support for legalization of marijuana than against. And here are two further graphs, the top one showing what I just showed, and here's the second one. And here you can see the silent generation at the bottom going from 15 to 29. You can see baby boomers going from 43 to 50, not much movement. You can see Generation X there with the tan line coming up to a little over 50. And then the millennials, the strongest supporters, up to 68%. Here's some data from the ACLU study I'll present a little bit later in the presentation about how much Ohio spends annually for marijuana possession enforcement, police, judicial and legal, and corrections. And this adds up to $120 million spent in 2010 just on marijuana possession laws. And this is 48.2% of all drug arrests are for marijuana possession. So Ohio, marijuana possession arrests, annual cost $120,148,064. And consider the trend nationally, increasing significantly marijuana possession arrests. Look at how the marijuana possession arrests have increased from 95 to 2010. And look here also, marijuana possession as a percentage of all drug arrests. Again, substantial increase in the last few years. And if Ohio is using marijuana arrests to generate revenue, jobs, meet arrest quotas, whatever, this is a great violation of their duty to protect and serve, and instead it's to exploit and prey upon. And $120 million spent leaves nothing to show for it. People keep on using marijuana at the same rate year after year. Some laws are just bad laws. In a 2013 Pew poll, they found 72% of Americans agreed government efforts to enforce marijuana laws cost more than they're worth. That's true. The costs are far heavier for some of our fellow citizens than for others. Seems to be, John Stuart Mill says, to be universally admitted there may be some unjust laws, and that law, consequently, is not the ultimate criterion of justice, but may give to one person a benefit or impose on another an evil which justice condemns. So, a shocking 2013 ACLU study shows blacks are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for possession than are whites, even though they both use at the same rate. So here is the rate of use. You can see between 10 and 12%. You can see the pink is representing white use, the black representing black use, and they're virtually the same for these years, 2001 to 2010. Now look at possession arrest rates. Possession arrest rates, many more blacks than whites being arrested for marijuana possession. Although, as we show, the use is virtually the same in these exact same years. So we tolerate rampant harm and damage as a result of the sedative drug, alcohol. And there are just regular body counts. And now OxyContin, opiates, prescription drugs, demonstrating a true gateway to heroin. Marijuana users tolerate and suffer from the damage inflicted by all the many drug users in society. It's only fair that marijuana users are tolerated as well. Marijuana users in Ohio are demanding through Issue 3 that their constitutional right to liberty finally be respected by the great state of Ohio. And is Ohio truly great if she doesn't live up to her constitution by allowing marijuana use by adult citizens? This is indeed an important vote. The question of Issue 3 is not whether you like marijuana or even whether you think it's moral to use. The question of Issue 3 is whether or not you respect equal rights of adult citizens of Ohio. Alcohol users are flaunting their rights. Their drug is rampant and greatly accepted, so much so that we're oblivious to alcohol everywhere, while marijuana users are treated like lepers and second-class citizens. Marijuana users cannot take it anymore. So tonight we're going to take a journey, and there are 9 steps to take on our journey. First, we'll set the context, and I'll talk about my work on marijuana. Then part 2, the science of marijuana. Part 3, truth about marijuana by Andrew Weil. Part 4, the New York Times endorsing the legalization of marijuana and their series of articles. Part 5, the dangers of legal alcohol. Part 6, rights in marijuana use. Part 7A, the opponent of legalization, the moral conservative. Part 7B, protecting the children argument. Part A, issue 3 in Ohio, and Part 8B, issue 2 in Ohio, the red herring fallacy. And then Part 9, the conclusion. So, Part 1, setting the context, my work on marijuana. I chose the discipline of philosophy because I knew there and only there, so far as I could tell as an undergrad, could I really search for truth and be critical, argue my case, get honest answers, and end up wherever. 1991, got my bachelor's degree in philosophy from Westminster College in Pennsylvania. I wanted the truth, as deep as I had to go. Is there a God? Why not suicide? What, if anything, is the meaning of life? From those undergrad days until now, I stayed a philosopher, searched for truth, critical, respect, and seek strong reasoning and arguments. And as an undergrad, Eva Cadwaller was my professor, and she's an IU, Indiana University grad. The last 3 years of her long career teaching were my 3 years until graduation. Her notes were comprehensive and thorough, and I soaked them up. I matured so very much under her tutelage. She first mentioned around 1990 that medical ethics may hold future employment for a philosopher. And I'm so happy that I waited until after 21 to smoke pods or drink alcohol. I recommend it. Work through your problems sober. Focus on what you want to be in the future. And for me, depression came out during my undergrad years. Undergrad time is one of intense memorization, reading so much philosophy, taking so many interesting courses, learning paradigms and basics, and putting in lots of hours in the library. Graduate school, my 20s, is where I opened up, made my own way, discovered myself, including beginning steps of seeking help for depression and social anxiety disorder. University of Pittsburgh philosophy post-baccalaureate studies for a year, discovered medical ethics as a specialization of several graduate programs in the field of philosophy. 1993, found a philosophy department with a strong program in medical ethics, lots of clinical experience, several international renowned professors in the academic field of clinical ethics. So I went to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville from 1993 to 1998. Also, my clinical depression, social anxiety disorder were both diagnosed and treated successfully. I discovered alcohol is not so good with antidepressants, and I also discovered marijuana is quite compatible. And doing lots of reading and reading and reading. Lots of deep thought, doing philosophy all the time. Time of experimentation. Graduate student with no major responsibilities, a wonderful, formative, and in retrospect, sometimes frightening time in my early 20s. I learned to interact with and not be intimidated by doctors and various other healthcare workers, learn medical terminology and my way around medical journals. My PhD dissertation was training medical students to care compassionately. In the compassion literature over and over and over, I ended up in end-of-life issues and hospice. I settled into oncology and hospice and palliative care specializations. I discovered there the ideal of the practice of medicine. Palliative care focused on alleviation of suffering and quality of life. So very patient-focused, authentically caring. Postdoctoral fellowship, first part of 1999, went to the Medical University of South Carolina, or MUSC. There, hospice and palliative care focused for 6 months. Daily rounds with oncologists and the team. Did volunteer work with hospice. Got to know several patients from the hospital and in the hospice. Became a hospice volunteer for a few years, starting at MUSC. And I discovered during my hospice volunteering, terminally ill patients are not allowed to use marijuana, although they're using the most toxic substances known to exist to extend their lives or for pain. Marijuana use happened, and in hospice, it was routine to just turn a blind eye, make no moral judgments. These people are dying. They could do what they want. I knew on a deep level denying the use of marijuana to these patients was morally wrong and could not be justified. This is where my work on marijuana began, with dying patients denied marijuana. I decided to commit myself to something I was very confident was morally wrong and could be changed. The theoretical arguments against marijuana prohibition are just so powerful. Whether Aristotelian, Kantian, Mill, Rawls, all would argue for legalization of marijuana. I can apply philosophy and argumentation to play a part in changing an unjust law. It's obvious marijuana should be allowed, applying to classic Beecham and Childress four-principle approach. I began using that approach in '93. I still use it in my own classes in 2015. Respect for autonomy, it's the patient's right to determine their health care decisions, be informed, empowered, provide marijuana. Beneficence, do good for patients. If it's beneficial, provide marijuana. Non-maleficence, do no harm. If we can replace a toxic substance with marijuana to cause less harm, we should provide marijuana. And justice, patients should be treated fairly and their rights respected. Again, provide marijuana just as we provide opiates. And the healthcare relationship is a partnership between the patient and the doctor. It's not doctor knows best imposing priestly directions upon an unknowing child-like patient. Patient has a life, values, beliefs. These partly determine appropriate care for unique patients. Patients have their own experience and knowledge from that experience. Dismissing this is disrespectful and elitist. Doctors can learn a lot from marijuana-using patients. I can envision a patient uses marijuana saying, I don't know about the lack of double-blind studies, doc. I can only tell you it works for me. Many people have used marijuana for many years and know well the effects. Clinicians learn people usually have a reason for doing what they're doing, and they should listen to that reason from their marijuana-using patients. So after MUSC, I decided I wanted to come back to a small liberal arts college atmosphere to teach philosophy, the atmosphere of Westminster. And the Lord provided what I prayed for. University of Findlay, I started 1999. I came as someone with the ability to teach medical ethics, given University of Findlay has so many healthcare-related majors. And from '99, I paid attention to the marijuana issue. '96 in California was the first medical marijuana law in the United States. Did substantial research with many different disciplines: neurology, history, political science, psychology, philosophy, poetry and literature, the beats, sociology, world religions. Read hundreds of journal articles and books from '99 to 2006. I put it all together during sabbatical in 2 years preparing my manuscript as a book. Title of my book, Otherwise Law-Abiding Citizens, Scientific and Moral Assessment of Cannabis Use. It was endorsed by Ethan Russo and Lester Grinspoon. Basically has 3 parts: scientific reality, social reality, moral assessment of use and law. And I basically think the social reality is opposed to issue 3, or legalization of marijuana, and the scientific is for issue 3, or the legalization of marijuana. So here's social reality against legalization of marijuana. Total refusal of cannabis for any use, number 1. Number 2, cannabis use causes violence. Number 3, suspicion of foreign cultures using cannabis. Mexicans, blacks, Eastern cultures. 4, cannabis is a gateway drug leading to narcotic use or harder drug use. 5, synthetic drugs are neutral. Natural herbs are uncontrolled and morally bad. 6, cannabis is Schedule I, high potential for abuse, no therapeutic uses. And 7, alcohol is not a drug. It's a social lubricant that can be used responsibly for recreational purposes. And here's a Pew study from March 2015. And I think this sort of mirrors what I found in my book on the opposition to legal marijuana. And I'll talk about these throughout my presentation. Hurts society and bad for individuals. It's a dangerous, addictive drug. Should be illegal. It's a gateway drug, bad for young people. And medicinal is okay, but recreational is bad. And those who argue for legalization, I call the scientific reality. They basically believe 5 things. Cannabis use is relatively safe. Cannabis has unique effects among drugs. Cannabis legalization is not a major threat to adolescents. Cannabis use is clearly therapeutically effective. And the major risk of cannabis use is cannabis dependence, which is basically 10% of all users. And here's the same Pew study from 2015, March. The supporters and their main arguments. Medicinal benefits, number 1. Number 2, not as dangerous as other drugs. Number 3, benefits of regulation, like tax revenue. 4, current enforcement is expensive, problematic. And 5, people should be able to do it if they want to. And so I thought this book, Working Men and Ganja, Marijuana Use in Rural Jamaica, sort of captures these two sides. For some, cannabis users are enlightened, sensitive, politically aware, free spirits, while for others, they are debauched, hedonistic, antisocial, and potential hard drug users. So let's talk about the science of medicine. Recent discoveries. THC is a recent discovery, just 1964, over 100 years after other drugs, practically because cannabis is soluble in oil and not in water, and all the other discoveries were water-soluble drugs. Water-soluble versus oil-soluble drugs. There's a current fear about marijuana staying in the body for so long. This doesn't mean psychological effects last that long. Psychological effects last 1 to 3 hours. Let's not discriminate against oil-soluble drugs, impose a standard of water-soluble drugs upon them. It's unfair to oil-soluble drug users. So it's wrong to say because it stays in your body too long, you can't use it, especially if it's therapeutic. Healthcare trumps the drug test for the job. Focus on the quality of the work of your workers. Cannabinoid receptors were named CB1 and CB2. These are G-protein coupled receptors found in the membranes of nerve cells involved in chemical signaling between cells. Here's my personal way of thinking about marijuana. It's a myelin nerve medicine for frayed or inflamed nerves from high acute or high chronic stress experiences at any age. If you're born with weak nerves, or from degeneration due to disease. So from social anxiety disorder, multiple sclerosis, PTSD, Parkinson's. Myelin is a fatty white substance that surrounds the axon dielectric material that forms a layer, the myelin sheath, usually around only the axon of a neuron. It's essentially for proper functioning of the nervous system. Under a microscope, it looks like strings of sausages. So you can see the sausage-like myelin sheath there. And here's what happens in multiple sclerosis, where the myelin sheath is destroyed or damaged, leaving scarring or sclerosis. Nerve signals thereafter are slowed or blocked, causing MS symptoms. Myelination happens early in life, the 14th week of fetal development. Little myelin exists at birth. And during infancy, myelination occurs quickly, leading to a child's fast development, crawling, walking in the first year. Myelination continues through adolescence. It seems medical marijuana can preserve and restore myelin, may even grow neurological connections. Demyelination is the loss of myelin sheath, insulating the nerves, the hallmark of some neurodegenerative autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis. And here, the biology of the cannabinoid system suggests there may be other benefits in the treatment of neurological disease, slowing the progression of neurodegenerative diseases. Activation of remaining receptors through stimulation by endocannabinoids can limit experiential Huntington's disease. Neurodegeneration is the main cause of morbidity in several diseases, like Huntington's, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, motor neuron diseases, stroke. So think of neuroprotection. If one were able to prevent the progressive cell death of Parkinsonism, ALS, Alzheimer's, Huntington's disease, the inevitable deterioration and ultimate demise that these disorders eventuate might well be mitigated or arrested. And as far as Alzheimer's goes, THC reduces agitation in patients with severe dementia, as well as improves sleep and appetite. And here from January 2012, IACM News, Alzheimer's disease. CBD reduces inflammation in the brain caused by amyloid beta in a rat model of Alzheimer's. Amyloid beta is found in high amounts in nerve cells of patients suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and it's toxic to the cells. CBD stimulated the formation of new nerve cells in the hippocampus, a brain region important for memory. And consider the text from Ohio Issue 3. I think it's well chosen, comprehensive, as a list of disorders for which medical marijuana will be allowed. There's a lot of alleviation of suffering here for a lot of people who could use marijuana. So here we have glaucoma, MS, HIV and AIDS, Alzheimer's, cancer, celiac disease, Crohn's disease, hepatitis C, PTSD, going on to some more arthritis, sickle cell anemia, various spinal cord injuries, cachexia or wasting syndrome, epilepsy, seizures, chronic nausea, depression, and perhaps other conditions as well. And here are the sites of the brain where the cannabinoid receptors are located, primarily basal ganglia, hippocampus, cerebellum. Basal ganglia is the very center of the case for cannabis as medicine. And these cells are not found in the brainstem, unlike alcohol. This is the major reason why there's 0 deaths from cannabis, from marijuana ever. Receptors found in the cerebellum and basal ganglia may account for the effect on muscle spasms, other body movement disorders. Here also from the Institute of Medicine, highest receptor density of these cells is found in the basal ganglia, regions that are involved in coordinating body movements. Patients with Parkinson's or Huntington's disease tend to have impaired functions in these regions. And here from a third authority, because of the basal ganglia involvement of dopamine, cannabis may be an effective treatment for neurodegenerative diseases, keeping the dopaminergic neurons functioning, thereby keeping intact physical and psychological abilities. Location of the cannabinoids, primary centers for involuntary and fine-tuned motor functioning, involving posture and muscle tone. Damage to neurons in this area may cause Parkinson's disease, progressive selective degeneration of dopaminergic neurons in the basal ganglia. Marijuana has been used to decrease the severity and frequency of seizures. And consider from the Washington Post 1 year ago, Mommy Lobby emerges as powerful advocate for medical marijuana for children. Of the 2.3 million Americans living with epilepsy, more than 1 million have seizures that cannot be controlled by modern medicine. Fiji's daughter, Charlotte, was one of them. Diagnosed with a rare condition called Dravet syndrome, Charlotte, then 5, was suffering from more than 300 seizures each week. She used a wheelchair, could only say a few words, and gone into cardiac arrest more than once. Desperate after doctors told them there was nothing more they could do, Fiji and her husband Matt turned to medical marijuana. They began to give Charlotte a few drops of an extract made from a strain of marijuana high in CBD, which is thought to be medicinal, low in THC, a component that creates a high, twice a day with her food. They were surprised when the seizures nearly stopped. A nonprofit foundation formed to assist those seeking the drug said 187 pediatric patients are being treated, and there's a waiting list of more than 3,000. Fiji and Joshua Stanley, the growers, co-created the strain. It's being used in the treatment, now known as Charlotte's Web, become heroes in the epilepsy community. Consider this quote. This is not how medical care is supposed to work in the United States. You shouldn't have to watch your child suffering and be told you can't have the medicine that can help because you live in the wrong state, said Colleen Stice, 35, former payroll manager in Tulsa, who quit her job to take care of her 14-month son, Rowan, after he began to have seizures. April 2014, National Epilepsy Foundation officially supports the medical use of cannabis, calls for federal and state-level policy changes to increase medical cannabis arrests, access, and research. And consider from our own Ohio, Addison Benton. She had to move to Colorado. Diagnosed with intractable myoclonic epilepsy early in life. At 1, she had hundreds of seizures a day that doctors could not stop. By age 3, 1,000 seizures a day. Medical marijuana is illegal in Ohio, so she can't get it here. She moved to Colorado. Now, 4 years old, 2 seizures a day. Marijuana is the only medicine to stop her seizures. Consider about 1/3 of children suffering from different forms of epilepsy experience more than 50% reduction in seizures by the use of an oral cannabis extract. Researchers at Anschutz Medical Campus, University of Colorado, report in the journal Epilepsy and Behavior. For ALS, manipulation of endocannabinoids has great potential treatment viability against inflammatory disorders. including inflammation of the central nervous system, patients with ALS. Also, endocannabinoids are elevated in tissues where inflammation is present. It's been suggested the accumulation of endocannabinoids is an adaptive attempt by the body to alleviate inflammation. Cannabinoids are chemically classified as terpenes. These are lipid-soluble hydrocarbons that function as major biosynthetic cellular messengers in many forms of life. These are organic compounds, the terpenes, produced by a variety of plants, particularly conifers, also by some insects like termites, swallowtail butterflies. Terpenoids are primary constituents of essential oils, many types of plants and flowers, and the aroma and flavor of hops, highly desirable in some beers, comes from the terpenes. Cannabis diverged around 27.8 million years ago from humulus, the hop plant, used to give beer its bitter and floral flavors, according to genetic analysis presented at International Cannabis Research Society's 2010 meeting. Hops and marijuana are cousins. And Carter, 2010, in terms of symptom management, cannabis is a substance with many pharmacological properties that are directly applicable to the clinical care of patients with ALS. These include analgesia, muscle relaxation, bronchodilation, saliva reduction, appetite stimulation, sleep induction, and mood elevation. Carter et al. Also say, indeed, cannabis as a single compound could potentially replace and provide the benefits of multiple standard medications, including analgesics, antispasmodics, anxiolytics, antidepressants, appetite stimulants, agents used to dry the mouth. Current glaucoma treatments include serious possible side effects, depression, asthma, slow heart rate, heart failure. Cannabis is known to reduce intraocular eye pressure. And every year, 80,000 people are blinded by glaucoma. So the current choice in Ohio, pre-issue 3, break the law and use marijuana or go blind. Fibromyalgia. Cannabis is far more effective at treating symptoms of fibromyalgia than any of the 3 prescription drugs approved by the FDA to treat this disorder. And a new disease category has even been presented based upon cannabinoid brain chemistry. It's called clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, or CECD, specifically found in patients suffering from migraine, fibromyalgia, and irritable bowel syndrome. And it's talk about migraines. Ethan Russo says the following about success of using marijuana for migraines. Quote, this author's personal experience in talking to several hundred migraine sufferers who've employed cannabis, 80% have noted improvement, often with complete symptomatic relief. Cannabis has a long-established history of efficacy in migraine treatment. Early 1800s, mid-late 1800s, it was often used to treat migraine. J.B. Madison, in an 1891 medical journal, explains cannabis not only blocks the pain of migraine, but prevents migraine. And here's the father of modern medicine, William Osler. Cannabis is probably the most satisfactory remedy for migraine. And let's talk about reducing opioid-related morbidity. While there are no fatalities ever recorded from marijuana, there's a serious opiate problem in the U.S. with a large number of painkiller deaths. Consider the recent surge of deaths by overdose. See, going from 2000 and 2001 to 8,000 overdose deaths from heroin in 2013. From 1,500 deaths by benzodiazepines 2001 to almost 7,000 in 2013. From 9,000 deaths in 2001 from prescription drugs to almost 25,000 deaths in 2013. From 5,500 deaths from opioid pain relievers in 2001 to almost 16,000 deaths from opioid painkillers in 2013. Also notice there's no National Institute on Drug Abuse overdose death rate information on marijuana, because no one dies from a marijuana overdose. And let's just go back a little bit farther and see where this whole opioid mess began, with opioid pills and marketing use for chronic pain. Look, 1995, opioid pills are approved by the FDA, December. Launched 1996. There are warnings right off the bat against crushing, breaking the pills, high abuse potential. Purdue implements an aggressive marketing campaign directed at primary care providers to use in non-cancer pain, use as a first-line therapy for chronic pain. They use direct advertising to physicians, medical journals, conferences, videos. In 2000, 4 years later, where there are already reports that we're having abuse problems. Increasing media and state reports of diversion of OxyContin, crushing tablets, addiction, withdrawal, fatalities. Prominent affected areas include Ohio. That's in 2000. And look at 93, 94, 95. These pills come out, and look what happens to overdose deaths from 95 to 07. They virtually triple. And you can see in Ohio, southern Ohio is hit especially strong by a lot of overdose deaths. Just this past August 2015, at the same time, the FDA has approved the use of OxyContin for kids 11 to 16 years old. We continue to trust pharmaceutical companies, and we continue to demonize marijuana. Current results are heroin addiction and death. Pharmaceutical companies are businesses. They spend a huge amount of money on marketing. The increase in opioid prescriptions is intended. Marijuana could work alongside of instead of opioids. For some patients, there's a more favorable risk-benefit analysis for using marijuana instead of opioids, especially with a real fair addiction. Consider attitudes and beliefs about the use of cannabis for symptom control. Cannabis could very sensibly be used instead of opioids by many patients. Basic problem for using opioids for pain control for chronic pain can be seen well by those who work with dying patients. Here's Carter, 2011. When treating pain in a terminal cancer patient, using opioid drugs will typically provide good relief. However, in hospice, mortality is a forthcoming and expected outcome. This may not be the case in palliative medicine, where the patients seek aggressive treatment for pain, yet death may not occur for some time. Here, successful use of opioids will warrant more frequent patient reassessments and significant pharmacovigilance. Some critics of legalization of marijuana say legalization of marijuana would just be adding to the problem. Not true. It would replace many more harmful substances, opioids, recreational alcohol, for example. If the problem is the current epidemic in Ohio, marijuana legalization will help solve the problem with less fatalities, the primary measure, less deaths. Here's Carter from 2011. Had cannabis not been removed from our pharmacopoeia 7 decades ago and remained available to treat chronic pain, potentially thousands of lives that have been lost to opioid toxicity could have been prevented. Consider this key article from JAMA Internal Medicine. And there's a growing literature here on reducing opioid mortality. Here's the point. Where medical marijuana is legalized, overdose deaths have decreased. Here's the Bachhuber et al. Study from 2014, study of 1999 to 2010, medical marijuana laws and opioid overdose death. And the finding, 25% fewer deaths from opioid overdoses in states allowing medical marijuana. On average, states allowing medical use of cannabis have lower rates of deaths resulting from opioid analgesic overdoses than states without such laws. On chronic pain, briefly, Franco Groten-Herman, his article from cannabinoids. In recent years, a number of clinical studies with different cannabinoid preparations demonstrate analgesic effects in different chronic pain conditions. And the most commonly used synthetic analgesics, aspirin, acetaminophen, like Tylenol, NSAIDs, like ibuprofen, are not addictive, but they're often insufficiently powerful. Furthermore, aspirin has serious toxic side effects, including gastric bleeding or ulcer. and in the long run, a risk of liver or kidney failure. Risk-benefit analysis for some patients may be for marijuana over aspirin or other anti-inflammatory drugs. Let's talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. Here, April 2013, cannabinoids reduce traumatic stress. It's well known that cannabinoids reduce symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Cannabis can be effective in extinguishing adverse memories. Hippocampus location of the CB1 receptors, also in the limbic forebrain, where impairments in cognitive flexibility manifest in increased preservatory behaviors. Disorders created by chronic stress can perhaps be reversed via activation of the CB1 receptors. In his fascinating book, The Botany of Desire, A Plant's Eye View of the World, Michael Pollan examines, as one of the 4 plants he looks at, cannabis plant, marijuana. And he talks about the positive therapeutic effect on PTSD. And he says, yeah, forgetting can be a curse, especially as we age, but forgetting is also one of the more important things healthy brains do, almost as important as remembering. Sometimes patients with PTSD also have to remember to forget. Here, stimulation of the endocannabinoid system may be useful to extinguish certain adverse memories. Another source, overall our findings support the endogenous cannabinoid system could represent a therapeutic target for the treatment of diseases associated with inappropriate retention of adverse memories, such as PTSD, phobias, certain kinds of chronic pain. THC may improve fear extinction in anxiety disorders. THC prevented recovery of fear in an experiment of extinction learning up the road at the University of Michigan. Here's another from 2012. Reduced level of CB1 receptors increases memory of fearful events. CB1 deficiency enhanced contextual fear memory. Supporting the key role of endocannabinoid signaling in learning and memory, in particular following highly adverse encounters. Cannabinoids ameliorate memory impairment induced by chronic stress. Neuropsychiatric disorders could represent a novel approach to treat these. And a large representative survey of 2,672 adults, a diagnosis of PTSD was associated with increased lifetime history of marijuana use, as well as past year and daily cannabis use. So returning soldiers, others who are traumatized, may be drawn to marijuana use for its therapeutic effects. They're perhaps self-medicating to positive therapeutic effects. Consider alcoholism. With marijuana, we're talking a harm reduction approach. Let's replace alcohol with marijuana. And people are able to live a life without a variety of negative effects that come with alcohol. Todd Mukaraya from California specialized in this approach. One of his studies, 92 of his own patients showed they completely replaced alcohol with marijuana. Alcohol leads to violent, destructive consequences, deaths involved. Given so many major harms to this sedative drug, alcohol, marijuana can save marriages, jobs, families, communities, lives. Let's move now from the brain to briefly look at the plant and the chemical compounds of marijuana. Over 500 chemical compounds in marijuana or cannabis, many quite familiar substances. Of course, the unique cannabinoids, but also nitrogenous compounds, amino acids, proteins, sugars, hydrocarbons, simple alcohols, aldehydes, ketones, simple acids, fatty acids, esters, lactones, steroids, terpenes, and they are referred to as terpenes, considered a terpene, non-cannabinoid phenols, flavonoids, vitamin K, 2 pigments, 9 elements. And of the cannabinoids, there's CBD, and known to have therapeutic effects, reduce anxiety, antipsychotic, anticonvulsant, therapeutic for asthma. CBN, anticonvulsant, anti-inflammatory. CBC, CBG, analgesic, inhibits growth of oral cancer cells. THCV, effective against migraine. Also pyrene, also in hops, the cousin marijuana, limonene, pugilone. These over 500 compounds, many with known therapeutic effects, when they act synergistically, are therapeutic as well. It's as if they were designed by God to be just as they are, and this plant just as it is. Summary of the cannabinoid medicine or therapeutic use of marijuana argument or information. The brain or the central nervous system has cannabinoid receptors. These have been named CB1 and CB2, correlated with specific diseases. Using marijuana to activate these receptors leads to various therapeutic benefits. For example, great reduction of seizures. Cannabis is made of over 500 chemical compounds, many of which are known to have therapeutic purposes. Some in the marijuana debate will say, why don't these patients just take the legal THC pills available to them since 1985? Well, cannabis plant's therapeutically superior to these pills in at least 8 different ways. First, synthetic THC is just one chemical. Marijuana is 500 different chemicals, and they're interacting chemicals. Second, there's better neurological binding and effectiveness of plant material over synthetic THC. Third, other chemicals of the cannabis plant offset negative effects of marijuana. So we've seen with pure THC pills, they've led to psychotic reactions. These are also problems we see with edibles that I'll get to here shortly. Fourth, other chemicals in the cannabis plant contribute to the therapeutic effect of THC. Other chemicals make for more efficient metabolism of the THC. Sixth, herbs are better metabolized than synthetic drugs. Seventh, synthetic THC pills are difficult to swallow for some patients, like cancer chemotherapy patients. And eighth, smoked cannabis has immediate therapeutic effects, 10 to 15 seconds. THC pills can take an hour or more to take effect. So there are over 500 chemicals in this marijuana plant, seemingly in complex interaction. Pulling out THC, this one chemical out of that 500, is taking it out of its natural context, and its results are inferior therapeutic effects, including psychosis from THC pills. And as a personal aside, again, God had a reason for putting all these chemical compounds in this plant. It is just amazing. Our obsession with pharmaceuticals and pills and capsules goes back to the end of the 19th century. There's a battle there between healers and herbalists and doctors and pharmacists. At the end of the 19th century, doctors and pharmacists won. Therefore, today we take pills, not plants, and we're unable to benefit so much. A bit over 100 years later, we think of or are brainwashed to believe that medicine is pills and capsules, not plants and herbs and oils. My experience is that pharmacists, pharmacy professors, and doctors know very little about plants and herbal medicines, especially marijuana. With all these medicinal benefits, relative safety, consider again, marijuana users are making an equal rights argument for access to their drug. They cannot understand how marijuana is illegal when addictive opiates are allowed and mood stabilizer prescriptions are routine. Consider this article on Valium's contribution to our new normal by the New York Times. Nearly 50 years ago, Valium was introduced and aggressively marketed. We've learned its lessons well. My generation of aging baby boomers does its brain styling, by and large, with antidepressants. Prozac, Wellbutrin, Celexa, Paxil, Zoloft. For my daughter's generation, the millennials, pills of choice tend to be Ritalin and Adderall for mental focus. But when Americans are feeling out of sorts, we're still more likely to turn to anti-anxiety drugs than to any other kind. The leading successor to Valium, Xanax, outsells every other psychiatric drug on the market. 48.7 million prescriptions last year. Even Valium's still out there, the classic little black dress of tranquilizers. In 2011, 14.7 million prescriptions were written for the drug that first made its cultural mark as a Rolling Stones song, Mother's Little Helper, back in 1966. Consider the side effects of Xanax. They include memory problems, confusion, hallucination, severe skin rash, yellowing of eyes, seizures, problems with coordination. And marijuana is questioned because it causes mental impairment. Equal rights means if you allow all these drugs, you allow marijuana. Let's go into part 3 and talk about the truth of marijuana with an excellent book by Andrew Weil. From Chocolate to Morphine, everything you need to know about mind-altering drugs. 14 chapters, an excellent, readable, accessible chapter on marijuana. He says marijuana is an active placebo. It brings out things that are already there in their user. The experience of the user has a lot to do with the user's expectations. This is different than physically addictive drugs. It's a unique psychoactive drug, soluble in oil, not in water. Neither a stimulant nor a depressant, some features of both, not a true hallucinogen. And in this highly charged atmosphere, arguments about marijuana tend to be more political than factual. And because pharmacologists and medical doctors are just as caught up in the politics of marijuana as other people, it's difficult to get neutral information about the drug. Much marijuana research sets out to prove preconceived ideas. Much of it's not worth reading. The medical safety of marijuana is great. It does not kill people in overdose or produce other symptoms of obvious toxicity. Occasional use is no more of a health problem than the occasional use of alcohol. The medical safety of marijuana is great. Consider the major harms from marijuana use. First, consider the logical hypothesis. Since cannabis smoke and tobacco smoke both have similar carcinogens, tobacco smoke causes cancer of the lung. Cannabis probably causes cancer of the lungs. Well, here's a study from 2005. There's a conspicuous lack of evidence in the association between cannabis smoking and lung cancers. And here from the American Thoracic Society, 2006, they have a study, no elevated cancer risk for even the heaviest pot smokers. Did find a 20-fold increase of lung cancer risk for people who smoked 2 or more packs of cigarettes a day. Chronic heavy cannabis smoking is associated with increased symptoms of chronic bronchitis, coughing, production of sputum and wheezing. Lung function is significantly poorer. There's significantly greater abnormalities in the large airways of marijuana smokers than in non-smokers. This is one of the best studies I've found on the potential harms of marijuana use, led by Wayne Hall, 1998. Summary of the adverse effects: acute effects, anxiety and panic, especially in naive users, impaired attention and memory, and psychomotor performance when intoxicated. Possibly an increased risk of accident if the person drives a motor vehicle, but especially if it's used with alcohol. An increased risk of psychotic symptoms among those who are vulnerable because of personal or family history of psychosis. Chronic effects, uncertain but possible, probable. Chronic bronchitis, histopathological changes that may be precursors to development of malignant disease. Cannabis dependent syndrome, characterized by an inability to abstain from or control cannabis use. And subtle impairments of attention and memory that persist when the user remains intoxicated, that may or may not reverse after prolonged abstinence. And these are possible effects to be confirmed: increased risk of cancers in the oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, leukemia among offspring exposed in utero, and also possible adverse to be confirmed: impaired educational attainment in adolescent, underachievement in adults and occupations requiring high cognitive skills. Groups at a higher risk: adolescents with a history of poor school performance who initiate cannabis use in early teens are at an increased risk of using other illegal drugs and becoming dependent on marijuana. Women who continue to smoke cannabis during pregnancy, chance of low birth weight baby. People with asthma, bronchitis, emphysema, schizophrenia, alcohol, other drug dependence. Illnesses may be exacerbated by marijuana use. Overall, acute, chronic, at-risk harms pale in comparison with death and disease caused by legal alcohol. It's hard to pinpoint some disease that's actually caused by marijuana. And let's look at the harms of marijuana compared and contrasted to the harms of other drugs. Another excellent study by David Nutt et al. From the Lancet, 2007, a rational scale to assess the harms of drugs. They have 2 independent groups of experts rating drugs using 9 total factors, dangerousness of drugs. 3 physical harm factors, physical harm, chronic, acute, and intravenous harms. Intensity and dependence harms, intensity of pleasure, psychological and physical dependence, and then social harm of intoxication, other social harms, healthcare costs. They rank them from A to C. A is most dangerous, C is least dangerous. And here is what they find. Most dangerous, class A, heroin, cocaine, barbiturates, street meth, alcohol. Class B, moderately dangerous, ketamine, benzodiazepines, amphetamine, tobacco, buprenorphine. And class C, the least dangerous drugs. There's marijuana, cannabis. And you can see the others there. Conclusion, marijuana is not a dangerous drug. And as for marijuana causing lack of motivation in adolescence, here's Andrew Weil, quote, heavy pot smoking is more likely to be a symptom of amotivation than a cause, and those same young people would probably be wasting their time in other ways with other drugs if pot were not available. And let's talk about the truth of marijuana. When people learn to get high on marijuana, their early experiences with it are often quite lively. Everything may strike them as funny. All sensory experiences become novel and interesting. Listening to music, eating, making love can become more than usually absorbing. Time seems long and drawn out. But with repeated use, these remarkable effects tend to fade away. Regular users may find that pot makes them relaxed or more sociable without greatly affecting their perceptions or moods. Very heavy users usually feel little from the drug, often smoking it simply out of habit. Bad reactions to marijuana are more likely when high doses of strong material are taken in bad settings, especially by inexperienced users. Most are simply panic attacks, easily treated with reassurance that everything will be all right as soon as the drug wears off. The effects of smoking marijuana usually diminish after an hour and disappear after 2 or 3. Some people, if they smoked a lot of pot, feel tired or fuzzy the next morning. Taken by mouth rather than smoked, marijuana is a more powerful drug, slower to come on with longer lasting effects. The crude drug can be added to food, and the active principles are easily extracted in alcohol or fat. The main problem with oral use is the risk of overdose. Since the stomach absorbs the drug unevenly, the right dosage is hard to estimate, and it's easy to take too much. Overdoses of cannabis are unpleasant, though not dangerous medicinally. They can make people extremely disoriented and delirious, as if suffering from a high fever, and often followed by stupor and hangover. Aside from respiratory irritation, says Weil, heavy marijuana use does not seem to cause other medical problems. Dependence on marijuana does not exactly resemble dependence on any other psychoactive drug. At its worst, marijuana dependence consists of chain smoking from the moment of getting up in the morning to the time of falling asleep, pattern similar to many cigarette smokers. Craving for the drug is not nearly as intense as tobacco, alcohol, or narcotics. Marijuana dependence can be sneaky in its development. It doesn't appear overnight like cigarette addiction, or in a matter of weeks like heroin addiction, but builds up over a long time. In most cases, people begin smoking pot only in special, unique, usually social situations, but with increasing use, however, tolerance develops, and also people learn to adapt to being high. Soon they can perform normal activities under the influence of marijuana. With time, unless precautions are taken, marijuana smoking can gradually pervade all their waking hours. At that point, habit's not easy to break. Worst case scenario, marijuana dependence. Like obsessive compulsive disorder, it's more about the wasted time than the physical damage being done. Roughly 10 to 12% of all marijuana users are dependent, or 9% according to the Institute of Medicine study I'm going to bring up shortly in the slideshow. And about 75% of those 10 to 12% have an underlying mental illness. Making it legal to use marijuana shows more compassion for the mentally ill, make it much more likely that those with marijuana dependence will seek help. Here's Weil. Even the heaviest use of marijuana doesn't lead to heroin or any other drug. The concept of marijuana as a gateway drug is nonsense. Even the heaviest use of marijuana doesn't lead to heroin or any other drug. Many junkies smoked marijuana before they tried opiates, but few marijuana users take narcotics. Many junkies also drank alcohol heavily, sometimes at very young ages, before they discovered heroin. Yet no one argues that alcohol leads to heroin. The reason, of course, alcohol enjoys general social approval, while marijuana is a bad drug and invites false attributions of causality. Institute of Medicine study in 1999. The legal status of marijuana makes it a gateway drug. And they also say it does not appear to be a gateway drug to the extent that it's the cause or even a major significant predictor of serious drug abuse. And from Drugs in Society, millions of marijuana users never go beyond the gateway drugs used. And consider this further. Although it's true that many heroin addicts began drug use with marijuana, it's also true many, if not most, used coffee and cigarettes. Millions of marijuana users never go beyond the gateway drugs used. There are only a few thousand opiate addicts in Great Britain, but millions who've tried cannabis. Much more important factors are the personality of the users, the social environment. Youths who turn to drugs are usually slightly to seriously alienated individuals. Thus, progression from marijuana or other drugs is more likely to depend on peer group composition, family relationships, social class, and the age at which drug use began. Consider this from Weil. Adaptation of marijuana enables users to perform well under its influence. Unlike alcohol, it does not invariably depress reflexes and reaction times. Some users feel marijuana helps them concentrate and enables them to work better, but even they have to learn to adapt to its effects. So, on traffic accidents, recent study from the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration indicates marijuana use does not significantly increase traffic accident use. Study looked at 9,000 drivers over 20 months. Cannabis use did not noticeably impact crash risk. So look at the data here. When it comes to driving, alcohol much more dangerous than other uses. So you look at chances at an increased traffic accident here in this graph. Marijuana is the first drug listed, and there is no increased risk at all. And then look at alcohol on the other side, 600% increased risk. And not only is there no increase in traffic accidents, a new study shows that legalization of marijuana results in a decrease in traffic deaths. Here, 9% drop in traffic deaths, 5% reduction in beer sales. Also, another study, 2012, reduction of traffic fatalities through reducing alcohol consumption by young adults. University of Colorado in Denver. Here's the truth about marijuana. The main danger of smoking marijuana is simply it'll get away from you, becoming more and more of a repetitive habit, less and less of a useful way of changing consciousness. Unless you set rules for when and where you smoke, you're likely to find yourself using pot more than you should, to the point where all interesting and useful effects of the drug disappear and you're left with a stubborn, unproductive habit. Worst case scenario with marijuana, stubborn, unproductive habit. And here's advice from Weil. If you find the effects you like from marijuana becoming less intense or disappearing altogether, stop using it. You can resume after a break and get them back. The trick is to keep frequency of use below the level where you become insensitive to marijuana's interesting effects on consciousness. Odd as it may sound, less is more. You could easily prove that to yourself. So, summary on the truth about marijuana. Marijuana is among the safest of drugs. The main problem with marijuana is dependence. 10 to 12% of all users are dependent. And this is more or less treated like obsessive compulsive disorder. No physical dependence, just psychological dependence. Symptoms of withdrawal, but no syndrome. Majority of marijuana users experiment briefly and discontinue its use. Only a minority of those who try marijuana go on to use the drug on a regular basis for an extended period of time. Consider this as well from the Institute of Medicine. The age distribution of marijuana users among the general population contrasts with that of medical marijuana users. Marijuana use generally declines sharply after the age of 34 years, whereas medical marijuana users tend to be over the age of 35. Okay, let's go on to the New York Times endorsing the legalization of marijuana in the summer of 2014. They came out with a 6-part series of articles on the issue. From letting states decide, the injustice of the arrests for marijuana, federal marijuana ban, it's rooted in xenophobia, what science says about marijuana, the great Colorado weed experiment, and rules and regulations, really, for the marijuana market. So first, it's increasingly the increasing absurdity of federal government's position is evident in the text of the Nixon-era law. Marijuana Schedule I, to this day, as I speak, alongside the most dangerous and mind-altering drugs on earth, LSD, heroin, bufotenin, a toxic hallucinogenic toad venom that can cause cardiac arrest, and marijuana is next to toad venom. No medical use? That would come as news to millions of people who have found that marijuana helped them through many different diseases, AIDS, nausea, the seizures of epilepsy. America's 4-decade war on drugs is responsible for many casualties. Criminalization of marijuana has been most destructive part of that war. You can measure the toll in dollars, billions of dollars thrown away each year in enforcing pointless laws. Years wasted behind bars, or with a child, years of growing up without a father. Lives, those damaged if not destroyed by the shockingly harsh consequences that follow even the most minor offenses. And the volume of law enforcement resources is bad enough. But it's even that much worse in justice when we have the racial disparity. Blacks using the same basic rate as whites, but blacks 3.7% more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession. So here is the study to which I refer, the war on marijuana in black and white. Billions of dollars wasted on racially biased arrests, June 2013, by the American Civil Liberties Union. And here you see again the use data. From 10 to 12% rate of use among whites and blacks from 2001 to 2010. And here again are the arrest rates from the same 2001 to 2010. 600, 700 times more likely to be arrested if you're black than if you're white. In Ohio, blacks are 4.1 times more likely than whites to be arrested for marijuana possession. And here's the page from the ACLU report on marijuana possession arrests in Ohio. And again, the pink represents white, the black represents black. And here's the arrest rate, 4.1. Here's statewide Ohio marijuana possession arrest rates, 2001 to 2010. Look at the great disparity. Many more black people arrested than white people. And you can see total drug arrests in 2010. Marijuana accounts for 48.2% of all drug arrests. For Ohio, $120 million spent in 1 year on marijuana possession arrests. And consider this map of Ohio, and the gray counties are the ones that are above the national average of if you're black, then you're 3.73 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than if you're white. And so you can see some of the Ohio counties there where it's higher than the national average to be arrested for marijuana possession if you are black. So marijuana possession arrests in the state of Ohio are racist. It's not clear racist intention matters to judge this as unfair, just by the numbers alone. A fair law would not work this way. Consider the injustice of marijuana arrests. True, only about 6% of marijuana cases lead to felony convictions, but the misdemeanor arrests that do follow do end up on a person's record. And in poor minority neighborhoods where young men are more likely to be outside, repeatedly targeted by law enforcement, these arrests accumulate. Before long, a person has a criminal history that is all marijuana misdemeanors, dismissed cases. Criminal history influences severity of future punishment, however insignificant. And a misdemeanor conviction can lead to revocation of professional license, suspending a driver's license, inability to get insurance, mortgage, bank loans, denial of access to public housing, loss of student financial aid. For those who live in poverty or trying to get out, these are stifling, quite stifling and punitive punishments, especially for a drug so compatible with society's favorite drug, alcohol. People could be fired from their jobs because of a marijuana arrest. Even if a judge eventually throws the case out, the arrest record's often available online for a year for any employer to look up. Let's go to part 3. The federal law that makes possession of marijuana a crime has its origins in legislation passed in a 1930s atmosphere of hysteria, firmly rooted in prejudice against Mexican immigrants and African Americans who were associated with marijuana use at the time. Legal Scholars, another great book, The Marijuana Conviction by Richard Bonney and Charles Whitebread, the marijuana conviction. There they say the drug's popularity among minorities and other groups practically ensured it would be classified as a narcotic, attributed with addictive qualities it did not have, set alongside far more dangerous drugs like heroin and morphine. 1930, Congress consolidated their drug effort into what they called the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, led by the endlessly resourceful Commissioner Harry Jacob Anslinger, who became the architect of national prohibition. His case were made upon these two claims. Number one, the drug causes insanity, pushes people towards horrendous acts of criminality. Second, it's fiercely addictive. These are lies. They were used to justify harassing black and Mexican persons who were predominant users of marijuana at the time. And the ACLU 2013 study shows continued racism. There's one of Commissioner Anslinger's comments there. Reefer madness in the 1930s began laws against marijuana that we have today. Opposition to marijuana originated in racism against blacks and Mexicans. Do racist laws somehow become non-racist, or are they always racist? Voting for issue 3, voting for legalization of marijuana, ending marijuana prohibition will finally end this racism. Consider that the silent generation was subject to this first line of propaganda. So powerful. We really hadn't seen such propaganda before. The masses made to parrot what they were presented to consume. Hearst newspapers had such control. There's another one of Anslinger's quotes, obviously concerned with black people there. On to part 4. And now let's move to 2012. Michelle Leonhardt, administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration, says there's no difference refuses to say whether there's any difference between the effects of marijuana and those of other illegal drugs. All illegal drugs are bad for people, she says to Congress in 2012, refusing to say whether crack, methamphetamines, or prescription painkillers are more addictive or physically harmful than marijuana. Her testimony neatly illustrates the vast gap between antiquated federal law enforcement policies and a clear consensus of science that marijuana is far less harmful to human health than most other banned drugs, and is less dangerous than highly addictive but perfectly legal substances known as alcohol and tobacco. Because the federal government is so far behind, states have taken upon themselves to make things right. Issue 3, legalization efforts in Ohio, will make things right. Marijuana can't lead to a fatal overdose. There's little evidence it causes cancer. Its addictive properties, while present, are low, and the myth it leads to users to more powerful drugs has long since been disproved. So I actually found this other slide, and I did come up with some ways where marijuana can actually kill people, so maybe I'm not right on that. If you eat a handful of marijuana and choke to death on it, it could kill you. If a heavy crate of marijuana falls on you and crushes you, you could die from marijuana. If you slip on a baggie of marijuana and break your skull into thousands of pieces, you can die from marijuana. Or if a serial killer's name is marijuana, you could die from it. But the way you can't die from it is smoking it. And here on the other side, you have the annual deaths from tobacco, alcohol, car crashes, aspirin 7,600, peanuts 100, marijuana 0. Let's talk about some regulation. Science and government have learned a great deal about how to keep alcohol out of the hands of minors. Mandatory underage drinking laws, effective marketing, have reduced underage alcohol use 24%, 24.8% in 2011, contrasted with 33.4% in 91. Cigarette use is among high school students at its lowest point ever, thanks to tobacco taxes and growing municipal smoking limits. There's almost some early evidence regulation would help combat teen marijuana use, which fell after Colorado began broadly regulating medical marijuana in 2010, reported in this New York Times article. Some people claim if marijuana were legally and easily obtainable, the number of people suffering harm would rise. And a World Health Organization study said even if marijuana use grew to the extent of alcohol or tobacco, it's unlikely to produce public health effects even approaching those of those two drugs. And while tobacco can cause cancer, alcohol abuse can lead to cirrhosis, no clear causal connection between marijuana and a deadly disease has been made. Consider addictiveness. Many opponents of Issue 3, many opponents of legalization of marijuana say marijuana is addictive. Anything could be addictive. Question is, how addictive? Marijuana isn't addictive in the same way as heroin, from which withdrawal is an agonizing physical ordeal. But it can interact with pleasure centers in the brain. It can create a strong sense of psychological dependence that addiction experts say can be difficult to break. Heavy users may find they need to take larger and larger doses to get the effects they want. When they try to stop, they get withdrawal symptoms, irritability, sleeping difficulty, anxiety, relatively mild. Institute of Medicine, the health arm of the National Academy of Sciences, said in 1999, study, 32% of tobacco users become dependent. 23% of heroin users become dependent. 17% of alcohol users become, 17% of cocaine users become dependent. 15% of alcohol users become dependent. Only 9% of marijuana users become dependent. 32 tobacco, 23 heroin, 17% cocaine, 15% alcohol, 9% marijuana. 9% of marijuana users become addicted. It seems misleading to claim marijuana is addictive. So, opponents of legal marijuana say it's a dangerous, addictive drug. I don't see how you could say it's an addictive drug, and it really doesn't look like it has dangers anywhere near those of alcohol, for example. One of the favorite arguments of legalization opponents is marijuana is the pathway to more dangerous drugs, but a wide variety of researchers have found no causal factor pushing users up the ladder of harm. While 111 million Americans have tried marijuana, only a third of that number have tried cocaine, and only 4% heroin. People who try marijuana are more likely than the general population to try other drugs, but that doesn't mean marijuana prompted them to do so. The main problem with the gateway argument, it falsely implies marijuana causes users to go on to use narcotics and harder drugs. Correlation does not prove causation. The real gateway drugs are tobacco and alcohol, which young people turn to before they use marijuana. And consider the data from the Monitoring the Future study, excellent study for data, from 1975 to 2014 on the use, disapproval, availability of marijuana for 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders. So you see use rate, the use of marijuana. Green is 8th grade, blue is 10th graders, red is 12th graders. It starts at 75, and it goes to 2014. And so you can see how the line goes. Red use gets up to 50% there around 1980, and then drops back down to 20% into the 90s, and is now around little over 30% with 12th graders of use. Disapproval is strong, is high among adolescents. 8th grade, 12th, 10th grade, 12th grade are all around 80%. Availability, you can see for 12th graders, currently illegal for all uses. And it's available 80% to 80% of 12th graders or higher. Totally illegal, not sold legally, and 40% of 8th graders can get marijuana. Note these lines don't go haywire when medical marijuana becomes legalized. There are many other factors in play for drug use by adolescents. Marijuana was found in 455,000 patients using ERs in 2011, and nearly 70% of teenagers in substance abuse programs operated by this Phoenix House use it with centers in 10 states. Says marijuana is their primary problem. So these are challenges, and they are challenges regulators in any state are going to have to face with legalizing marijuana. But they're familiar challenges. They'll become easier for governments to deal with once more of them bring legal marijuana under tighter regulation. Here is the Great Colorado Weed Experiment, Part 5. And here's one observation. Striking thing for visitors, how quickly marijuana industries receded into normality. Cannabis storefronts are plentiful in Denver, but not obtrusive, certainly not the way liquor stores often are. Marijuana growing operations are in unmarked warehouses on the city's industrial edges. Here you can see in the slide with the marijuana legalization in Colorado benefits. Tens of thousands not arrested. $40 million raised in taxes. $8 million funding youth education. 3% reduction in traffic death. 2.2% decrease violent crime. 8.9% decrease in property crime. The ominously predicted harms of legalization of marijuana. Blight, violence, soaring addiction rates, other ills remain imaginary worries. Burglaries and robberies in Denver are down. The surge of investment and of jobs in construction, tourism, and industries, on the other hand, is real. In a state where medical marijuana has been legal since 2000, doing little evident harm, the move to legalize recreational use was seen by most voters as a sensible next step. I think this is why it's also prudent for Ohio to legalize both recreational and medicinal at the same time. We're simply learning from Colorado. Ohio, too, sees and has found no good reason for not moving to recreational. Issue 3 does this both at once and is starting a trend for other states to follow. And this evidence counts strongly against the belief that marijuana must be kept illegal and needs to be policed. So this was the third big reason from the Pew study of people against legal marijuana. Why should it be illegal? It should be illegal. It needs to be policed. Well, from a lot of places, it just doesn't seem to be so. Cannabis advocates were caught off guard in the first months after legalization by complaints about overdosing on cannabis-infused foods and drinks. This moves us into the problem of edibles. Thanks to high-potency oils, a single chocolate bar, bottle of soda can contain enough THC to get several people high. An unwitting user may not realize this until an hour or two after eating or drinking too much. So remember, Weil and Rosen in From Chocolate to Morphine, they said taking THC through the stomach, the metabolism, and waiting for an hour, this can lead to a bad experience versus smoking it. So some emergency room visits, children sickened by edibles, prompted the state in May of 2014 to tighten labeling laws, requiring products to be clearly marked as marijuana. And then recent, after this article in 2014, it enacted an emergency rule requiring edibles to be divided or easily divided into single servings containing no more than 10 milligrams of THC. How to label single pieces of candy, keep tempting sweets away from children, or lingering questions. Policymakers trying to regulate the drug will face challenges similar to ones American lawmakers faced at the end of Prohibition in 1933. Like alcohol during Prohibition, marijuana is widely available across the United States today. It'll become much more accessible after legalization, when businesses engaged in its production and sale no longer operate in the black market nor engage in violence. Regulators will have to design policies that allow licensed businesses to undercut the illegal market, but to keep prices high enough so dependence on the drug doesn't increase a lot. One important way to curb use is to tax marijuana heavily, following the post-prohibition template of replacing criminalization with regulation and taxes. One of the most important lessons from the country's long battle with tobacco, the tobacco industry's advertising's outsized role in creating and sustaining addiction to nicotine, particularly among teenagers and young adults. Though marijuana is far less addictive than tobacco, states that choose to legalize it must impose limits on promotional activities of marijuana businesses. The controls should emulate the restrictions on banning outdoor advertising and production placements targeting young people that the tobacco industry accepted as part of its settlement with state attorneys general in 1998. States have got to require proper labeling and packaging of products containing mind-altering substances. Bo Kilmer, drug policy expert at Rand Corporation, said, regulators can restrict the sales of foods like candies, beverages, and cookies made with marijuana, or limit how much of the drug's active ingredients are in each serving. The ingredients should be distributed evenly throughout the product, and regulators must test samples for harmful levels of pesticides, mold, other impurities often found in illicit cannabis. So as to have something with which to compare marijuana in the argument for equal rights, alcohol is the obvious choice. Recreational, it's used in a rampant manner, tolerated by society, although it has major harms. And if these dangers are tolerated, those for marijuana should be tolerated as well. So here's what we would call a drink, one drink. 1 12-ounce regular beer, 8 or 9 ounce of malt liquor, 5-ounce glass of wine, 12%, or 1.5 fluid ounce of a shot of spirits, whiskey, gin, vodka. That's one drink. So 2 drinks for men a day, 1 drink for women per day is seen as healthy, as having a benefit for health. Here's 26,000 deaths averted in a year because of ischemic heart disease, stroke, diabetes, from benefits attributed to moderate alcohol use. Now, binge drinking, the real problematic drinking, is defined as a woman having 4 drinks at a sitting or a man 5 drinks. We've talked about what a drink entails. So 5 of those in about 2 hours. And the standard term for dependence for alcohol is alcohol use disorder in the DSM-5. Medical conditions doctors diagnose when a patient's drinking causes distress or harm. Alcohol abuse and dependence are in the same disorder, AUD, alcohol use disorder, mild, moderate, severe. Nearly 88,000 people die from alcohol-related causes yearly, annually. 88,000 people, making alcohol use the 3rd leading preventable cause of death in the United States. 2013, alcohol-impaired driving resulted or accounted for over 10,000 driving fatalities. 10,000 driving fatalities, a third of them, roughly a third of them. Binge drinking. In 2013, 6% of people 18 and older said they engaged in binge drinking in the past month. 6.8% heavy drinking in the past month. And there you can see different states and the percentage of adults who binge drink. Looks like Ohio's among the heavier of the drinkers there. Binge drinkers. Here we go back to the Monitoring Future study, 75 to 2014. Here is youth perceived risk and disapproval of having 5+ drinks at one time on weekends. This is alcohol and youth. And so you can see use is decreasing, use of alcohol by youth, 12th grade, 10th grade, 8th grade. Risk of having 5+ drinks in a row once or twice each weekend. Half think that's a risk, half don't think that's a risk. Looks pretty steady. Disapproval, around 80% there of having 5+ drinks. looks like it's going slightly upward. Availability, fairly easy or very easy to get alcohol. You can see it's getting a little more difficult. It's not quite as available. It's in a downward trend. Legal alcohol. 2006, National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism said that alcohol misuse problems cost the United States $223.5 billion with a B dollars a year. Almost 3/4 of total cost related to binge drinking. Research indicates alcohol use during teenage years could interfere with normal adolescent brain development and increase developing an alcohol use disorder. Underage drinking contributes to a lot of acute consequences: injuries, sexual assaults, death, including in car crashes. 1,825 college students between 18 and 24 die from alcohol-related injuries. 696,000 students between 18 and 24 assaulted by another student who'd been drinking. And here are some of the effects of legal alcohol. All different parts of the brain. Leads to a drive to keep drinking. Could cause aggression for no reason. It slows reflexes, decreases balance and coordination, can lead to sleepiness, unconsciousness, or death. Can cause people to become loud and aggressive. Can cause blackouts. Alcohol contributes to over 200 diseases and injury related to health conditions. Alcohol dependence, liver cirrhosis, cancers, injuries. Look at the heart conditions. Damage to heart, cardiomyopathy, arrhythmia, stroke, high blood pressure, liver, steatosis, hepatitis, fibrosis, cirrhosis, pancreas, swelling of the pancreas. Immune system makes drinkers more likely to have pneumonia and tuberculosis. With all these dangers, alcohol is legal and tolerated. No talk of prohibition to protect our children. Those who use the law to protect children, why don't you care about protecting our children from alcohol? Issue 3, legalization of marijuana, will bring, in Issue 3, 1,100 or so new stores to Ohio. Some opponents of Issue 3 have said, that's more than the number of Starbucks. That's more than the number of McDonald's. Well, let's contrast that number to the number of places that sell beer in Ohio. I'd say 1 million places is probably a modest estimate of how many places sell beer in Ohio. When contrasted with that, 1,100 doesn't sound like that many. So the dangerousness of marijuana and alcohol, it's crystal clear. Harms of alcohol are much worse than those of marijuana. Do the body count. A less dangerous drug should be legal for recreational use if a more dangerous drug is legal. How can that be denied? Marijuana users are now asking for their equal right to liberty and a pursuit of happiness as guaranteed by the Constitution of Ohio. So let's move into Part 6, rights and marijuana use. As U.S. citizens, this is from our preamble, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Here's the Ohio Constitution. Section 1 from the Ohio Constitution, rights. In accordance with Article 1, Bill of Rights, Section 1 of the Constitution of the State of Ohio. Section 101, inalienable rights. All men are by nature free and independent and have certain inalienable rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and seeking and obtaining happiness and safety. Enjoying liberty, seeking and obtaining happiness. This is exactly what adult marijuana users in Ohio want to do. Those against Issue 3, those against the legalization of marijuana, isn't marijuana use clearly a constitutional liberty Ohioans are guaranteed under this section of our Constitution? And keep in mind the next section for Issue 2, we'll come back to this, Section 102 of the Ohio Constitution, the right to alter, reform, or abolish government and repeal privileges. All political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their equal protection and benefit. And they have the right to alter, reform, or abolish the same whenever they may deem it necessary, and no special privileges or immunities shall ever be granted that may not be altered, revoked, or repealed by the General Assembly. So let's talk about unalienable rights. What's unalienable? It means it can't be transferred from its present ownership or relation. You can't alienate is to transfer ownership to another. Act of transferring ownership of anything. Even if I wanted to, I can't possibly transfer ownership of my right to use marijuana to the state of Ohio. It's inalienable. The question with issue 3, the question with legalization of marijuana in Ohio, will Ohio continue to disrespect marijuana users, or will it respect them? So Ohio is going to respect this right to use marijuana on the part of marijuana users in Ohio, voting for issue 3. We're going to continue to violate that right. Vote against legalization of marijuana. So liberty, if anything, means to be left alone, to use marijuana, at least in private, and pursuit of happiness. This basic pursuit means to choose how to live one's life. Some prefer to use marijuana in this pursuit. And let's talk about the pursuit of happiness. There's no clear and obvious way to attain happiness in this life. We each are so unique and varied, to prescribe one special way to happiness would simply not work. This is one of the great philosophical questions. How does one attain happiness? Not so easy to answer. And Immanuel Kant recognizes omniscience is required to ascertain what would make any particular person truly happy. Aristotle, so the pleasures of creatures differ in kind. And it's plausible to suppose those of a single species don't differ, but they vary to no small extent, in the case of men at least. The same things delight some people and pain others, and are painful and odious to some, and pleasant and liked by others. Here's some truth. Some people prefer alcohol, others marijuana. Different brains, different preferences. It's unfair and foolish to legislate proper and improper means to achieve happiness, for alcohol and against marijuana in the great state of Ohio. So in sum, Americans and Ohioans have certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These clearly are grounds on which marijuana-using adults are arguing their case for legalization. So let's go to look at the major opponent of legalization of marijuana, the moral conservative. And then we'll look at the major argument against legalization, protecting the children. The moral conservative is a person who would use the criminal law to prevent deviant or eccentric conduct, whether or not it's harmful to others. Conservative thesis is that it could be morally legitimate to preserve a society's traditional way of life from radical or essential change by means of legal coercion. Sometimes to broaden their justification for using the criminal law, citing indirect and vague long-term harms that would result to society from the conduct in question. For example, those in the Pew study from 2015, March, say if we legalize marijuana, it's going to be harmful to society and families. As the immorality spread its claim, their presence will inevitably be felt in subtle but pervasive ways that shock or disgust the ordinary person. This is the crucial move by the moral conservative, from morality to preference. Morality means at least two things: that there are good reasons given and there's an impartial consideration of those involved. Moral, by definition, means this: I don't care if you're duty-based and Kantian, virtue-based with Aristotle, consequence-based with Mill, or you're using a God-based theory. Impartiality and good reasons are what morality mean. Moral conservatives are against marijuana legalization, and they're not using good moral reasons against marijuana use. These are not good moral reasons. They're not being impartial. So what if you, moral conservative, were an adult citizen who preferred to smoke marijuana, found it helped you medicinally? How would you vote from that impartial perspective? That's what's being moral. However, in the process, moral conservatives' mere preference is overriding liberty. The marijuana user's right to liberty and the pursuit of happiness is being violated. Feinberg further explains the sense of unfairness experienced by the moral conservative with legalization of marijuana. The moral conservative saying many or most of the unwilling majority said have genuine interests, investments of their own personal well-being in the perpetuation of the traditional ways. So an abandonment of those ways, though either abrupt or through either abrupt or gradual changes, would be a setback to that interest. In response to this fairness line of argument, Feinberg counters by arguing such a position would justify too much coercion, would likely come back on the conservative to threaten some activities she or he would, her or himself, be unwilling to relinquish. So, quote, whatever principle of fairness the moral conservative uses to justify legal prohibition of unestablished minority styles of life, marijuana user, it'll be hard to put to explain why the principle doesn't establish with equal cogency the fairness of sweeping totalitarian restrictions. It'd be impossible, moreover, for the conservative argument to stop short of crossing the line between prohibition of a disapproved sort of conduct, marijuana use by adults, and a prohibition of speech advocating that conduct, or even speech advocating the permissibility or the legalization of that kind of conduct. Yikes! This is what I'm doing right now. Thank God we still have some liberty in Ohio, and we professors still have tenure so as to tell the truth. Once more, how is a conservative argument to stop short of justifying, again, on grounds of fairness, the enforced regulation of hairstyle, prohibition of long beards, prohibition of styles of clothing, of those who advertise themselves as nonconformists? Do not these visible deviations from prevailing standards weaken the norms as much as existence of devious attitudes, tastes, sex lives, and reading and entertainment preferences that are only indulged in private? Here's the point. If mere preference of the moral conservative is used to disallow marijuana use, then they can with consistency argue against speech, hairstyle, dress. Since we all agree they can't disallow certain speech, hairstyle, and dress, we should also agree they cannot disallow marijuana use. If we assume, it seems natural, human nature comes in different sizes and shapes, so to speak, that there are deep and morally significant differences among normal people in respect to basic temperament and emotional needs, then to insist that only some of these types of character, even if they're the most common ones, are entitled to their satisfaction, would seem to be unfair to others. A form of discrimination as arbitrary as racial prejudice. So choosing alcohol users over marijuana users is as arbitrary as racial prejudice. Imposing preference, denying preference of other, it's just racism. It's like racism. So it's arbitrary. It's saying, we just drink alcohol. That's just the way it is. We don't have any good reasons for it. Alcohol is legal, marijuana is illegal. White people use that fountain, black people use the other fountain. This is grossly unfair to marijuana users, especially otherwise law-abiding citizens. Ohio takes their money every year through various taxes, and they help make Ohio great. Ohio's not recognizing those rights promised in their Constitution. So, continuing with the moral conservative. Some disapproved of private conduct wrongs them, they claim, precisely because it harms them. It harms them because it sets back a genuine, partly other regarding interest they have in living a certain kind of homogeneous community, a community in which persons don't behave in a disapproved of way, even in private. Preventing such harm to them, they claim, legitimizes criminal prohibitions of the disapproved conduct of the others. And when two persons each have interest in how one of them lives his life, the interest of the one whose life it is the more important. I should think that this denial of his judgment is virtually tantamount to a denial of that person's liberty. So the moral conservative is not saying that. The moral conservative is saying, I don't like marijuana use. And this dislike overrides the choice of adult citizens in Ohio to use marijuana in private. No, this can't happen with Section 101 of the Ohio Constitution. That section grants liberty to pursue happiness. This liberty has to include the right to act in ways not preferred by my moral conservative neighbor, or else we don't even have any liberty. Consider Feinberg's drinking a bottle of beer example as analogous to using marijuana. What if my interest in being able to drink a bottle of beer whenever I feel like it when that interest clashes with the Puritans' more widely held interest of equal vitality and innocence in living an alcohol-free society. The meddler's interest in living a pure society can be disregarded just as easily as the meddler dismisses the adult marijuana user's interest. The desire to drink beer, to masturbate, or to eat pickled ham is to be dismissed as merely self-indulgent. We can equal justification dismiss the Puritan's interest that beer not be drunk as officious busybody's interest or gratuitous meddler's interest. The characteristic conservative argument is not that any given way of life is uniquely rational, but any severe change in traditional culture is evil as such, even though it might seem on other grounds to be an improvement. So, of course, the moral conservative claim that all change is evil is false. Here's two good changes: slavery being abolished and women getting the right to vote. But I assume the moral conservative, to be consistent, would probably have opposed those as well. This is the problem. Such thinking makes no moral progress. So why moral conservatives are morally wrong to forbid marijuana use by adults? Because doing so is utterly demeaning the autonomy of marijuana-using adults. So again, if I'm forbidden on pain of criminal punishment and public humiliation from acting as I prefer in ways that harm no one, in places where I offend no one, on the ground that in doing so I would be subtly changing the moral environment of my fellow citizens, I am being asked to acquiesce to a demand that would utterly demean my autonomy. Surely a person's autonomy, whatever else it may consist in, precludes his thinking of his activities, practices, beliefs, and preferences as no more than part of others' environments. How can I have any personal autonomy if my neighbors can claim a right to have me think, feel, and privately behave only in ways that they approve? Who are you, opponents of Issue 3, opponents of legalization of marijuana, to tell adults in Ohio they can't smoke pot at home? A king? Given the liberty Ohio promises, that's not your call. Section 101, the Ohio Constitution. All men are by nature free and independent and have certain inalienable rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, seeking and obtaining happiness and safety. Inalienable right, enjoying liberty and seeking, obtaining happiness. Aren't you disregarding the rights of Ohio citizens? A vote for Issue 3 is primarily a vote for rights. Feinberg suggests another possible way to argue for more conservative, to justify resistance to social change. More plausible way of arguing for a grievance, even without a harm, is to argue that persons brought up in a traditional way of life often order their own lives in all good faith, in reliance that the old ways will be continued. Emotionally unprepared, then, for drastic changes like marijuana legalization. They're left high and dry in their declining years. Not only disappointed, but rightly embittered by changes which are, in their eyes, betrayals. In response to these moral conservatives who are upset that marijuana is going to be legalized, something you always believed would never happen, sense of grievance in their cases is understandable, even when the aggrieved party can show no genuine harm to his interests or rude affronts to his sensibility. Understandable, perhaps, but justifiable? I think not. Never ever signed a social contract with such people, made a solemn vow, even an informal promise to keep things unchanged. If aggrieved parties believe otherwise on ideological grounds, then they're victims in a way of their own conservatism. So we're talking about the silent generation here. Reefer madness to which their young minds were subjected. This is very difficult for them to overcome. But do notice, they have increased. They've doubled in a little over 40 years, from 15% to almost 30%. So in summary, pursuit of happiness, preferences are different for different people. It's not something to be imposed, but chosen through liberty of each individual for him or herself as adult citizens. Individual rights and basic personal autonomy and how one acts in private trumps the meddler's worries, the moral conservative's worries about change in a new social environment. With the defeat of the moral conservative goes the hurt society reason against legalization of marijuana, as the liberty interest of the marijuana-using adult citizen trumps these concerns. And this bad for individuals, it's just not at all clear, given the low addiction rate, the no death, low dangerousness, how that's true. So this is that hurt society, bad for individuals. I think that reason has been defeated. The other major argument is voting against issue 3, keeping marijuana illegal protects children. However, it seems voting for issue 3 does more to protect children. So being for legalization of marijuana protects children. First of all, you got to be 21 years or older with legal marijuana. This will establish an age limit. Right now, there's no age limit. So it's odd to be against setting an age limit, but be for protecting children with a rampant black market. And against issue 3, against legalization, just continues the black market to control marijuana, no age limit. Second, the adult responsibility to prevent adolescent use stays the same. And there are many other more dangerous things around our youth right now, with beer and alcohol and liquor, guns, prescription drugs. Marijuana is one of the many things adults will responsibly keep their kids from. Issue 3, and legalization of marijuana offers promise of lower accessibility of marijuana and drugs to our kids. Currently, there's a bustling, thriving, unstoppable black market. Marijuana is easily available, or very easily available to 12th graders for over 40 years. Look at the percentages from 75 to 2014. And you probably can't see these because they look so small, but if you really squint, you won't see anything going below 81% from 75 to 2014. And this is availability of marijuana to 12th graders. So when I interpret the data I just showed you, what I see is prohibition sucks at protecting children. It's been over 40 years. It's the same thing, year after year. For Ohio, that's $120 million wasted. No change in rate of use of marijuana, it won't get better. The fourth reason to be for legalization of marijuana, laws don't clearly affect use. So if you're protecting your children, it's not clear that making marijuana legal for adult use is going to increase adolescent use. Here, the RAND studies, marijuana prohibition appears to have little or no impact on rates of use. People have various reasons for using marijuana. The law doesn't clearly determine their use. Rates of adolescent use is very complex, certainly no direct correlation with legal status for adult use. And adolescent use of marijuana is not increased in states where marijuana has been legalized. So consider July 2015, IACM News. Cannabis use didn't increase with teenagers in states in the United States where medical cannabis has become legal. This is a big study that came out. Most comprehensive effort to date. Does decriminalization of cannabis lead to more adolescent use? This is The Lancet Psychiatry, 2015. They found states that had legalized marijuana use had higher use prior to the laws enacted compared with states that kept it illegal. But those levels were unaffected with changes in the law, the study found. And this study is a 24-year period over 48 different states and 1 million different adolescents. So here is the little graph. And when marijuana becomes legalized, you don't see any big bump here. These lines stay the same. There are a lot of other things going on determining adolescent use than the law allowing adults to use marijuana. And so Montana, Rhode Island, Michigan, Delaware, they wrote laws have not measurably affected adolescent marijuana use in the first few years after their enactment. Rhode Island didn't find an increase in cannabis use after 2006 legalization. Contrasting Rhode Island and Massachusetts, Rhode Island allows, Massachusetts doesn't. No statistically significant differences in cannabis use between states with one allowing, another one not allowing marijuana. In these 12-state study, 2008, have not increased cannabis use among adolescents, teenagers. Teen use, and here has declined in states with medical cannabis use. In countries with more reformed marijuana laws, Britain, they show marijuana use has dropped. Netherlands, the rate of marijuana use in teens lower than the United States. Here's the fifth reason why the protecting the children reason is not a reason against legalization of marijuana. Peers and parents are the primary determinants of adolescent marijuana use. So if you look at studies on marijuana use in teenagers, their peers are number one, parenting number two. So the TIMS 2002 study, Cannabis Youth Treatment Study, for most adolescent problems, not just drugs. There's a high prevalence with problematic teen and adolescent use and high prevalence of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, psychiatric symptoms. Strong association with conduct disorders preceding marijuana use. Conduct disorders generally lead to substance abuse rather than the reverse. So protecting children from marijuana use, if you want to do that, then intervene where there's neglect and abuse with kids, having conduct problems, not by making marijuana illegal for adults to use. Again, the protecting children from marijuana use line of argument, it's not clear how a law allowing or forbidding adult use is going to matter for abused children. We need to intervene with those children who've been abused. Parental neglect and abuse, these are true gateways to marijuana. Addressing these are the solutions to stopping problematic adolescent use. Strongest factor associated with substance abuse, best friends being substance abusers. Youthful experimentation, you also find youth using marijuana with pubescent change. That's a correlation. The key institution to stop adolescent use is parents. And the kind of reinforcement provided by parents. Lower levels of coercive discipline. So styles correlated with increased risk of adolescent use: alcoholic, non-consuming and condemning, overly demanding, overly protective. Those will lead to increased use of marijuana. So to stop problematic adolescent marijuana use, like stopping problematic alcohol use by adolescents, stop abuse. Pay attention to our children. Stop things that lead them to these behaviors. The law prohibiting adults from using marijuana doesn't seem to be a primary factor causing a youth to use marijuana. Without this evidence, how can Ohio possibly justify denying constitutional right to adult citizens who choose to use marijuana? And if prohibition of adult use is the way to protect our children, then how can those against legalization of marijuana not be arguing for prohibition of alcohol, especially because alcohol does so much more damage? Seems that the protecting the children argument or the bad for young people argument against legalization of marijuana for adult use has very serious problems. And the legal status of marijuana is not really relevant to problematic adolescent marijuana use. So we look at all these different reasons against legalizing marijuana. I think they've all been defeated. So for the moral conservative, my constitutional rights as Ohio citizen and a U.S. citizen outweigh your meddling preference to not have marijuana use in your social environment. And if you are trying to protect children, that's fine, but there's no clear evidence that keeping marijuana illegal for use by adults is going to have any impact on whether or not kids use marijuana. So, into part 8 and then the conclusion. Part 8, issue 3. So, we now are considering legalizing marijuana for recreational and medicinal purposes in the state of Ohio. And under this Responsible Ohio initiative, would amend the Ohio Constitution, would legalize medicinal and recreational use. Would need a doctor's note for medicinal use. Recreational use may possess up to an ounce of the drug. Home growers for plants, but they have to have a cultivation license. The measures approved, there'll be a control commission to regulate industrial and homegrown cannabis production, chemical compound of products, sales, taxation. 15% flat tax for production facilities. 5% flat tax on retail stores. Revenue to be distributed, municipal, township governments, Strong County Fund, Marijuana Control Commission Fund. In addition, there'll be 10, under this initiative, under issue 3, 10 cultivation centers around the state. Private investors who funded the campaign to support this amendment contributed $2 million each. Now, this is sort of a unique move among states. Ohio's first state to be legalizing marijuana in this way. But it's something Ohio has already done with casinos in 2009, funded by, in that case, the Penn National Gaming Incorporation, which operates now casinos in Dayton and Toledo. So in Ohio, it appears the path for legalized marijuana is like the path for legalized casinos. And here's a question I have for you. But for Issue 2 and the title of Issue 3 that would legalize as a monopoly, would we be in Ohio be debating monopolies as we prepare to vote on Issue 3 to legalize marijuana? I don't believe so. And therefore, I suspect Issue 2 has been introduced as a distraction. So all this concern over 10 individuals making so much money seems odd. They're not the 1% of the richest people in the world. There are many other lucrative businesses and billionaires in society making massive profits. Having so much concern for people making money seems odd, especially relative to the 1% billionaires. But this summer, 2015, has been quite a summer in Ohio. In June, July, Responsible Ohio was notified there were not enough valid signatures for the initiative to be voted on. So Responsible Ohio sent an army of people out, and I was going up on my bike to the Hancock County Library with my kids, and we saw a barrage of clipboard-wielding Responsible Ohio representatives getting signatures. It was an amazing thing that they actually did that. And in the Ohio legislature, the Republican-controlled Ohio legislature, they were incensed with legalization of marijuana. And so they approved an anti-monopoly constitutional amendment, Issue 2, to appear next to Issue 3 on the ballot, which would nullify Issue 3. After the Republican Secretary of State, John Husted, determined there were enough signatures, he has naming rights over the issue and named Issue 3 this: grants a monopoly for the commercial production and sale of marijuana for recreational and medicinal purposes. And so Issue 2 was also introduced, and its title is Anti-Monopoly Amendment, protects the initiative process from being used for personal economic benefit. So Issue 2 changes the precious initiative process, and it makes it more difficult for citizens to get legislative approval to get an initiative on a ballot. This is a major impact for future initiatives from the people. And specifically, now with Issue 2, possibility would exist for 3 out of 5 members of a state ballot board to shut down citizen initiatives completely. Serious potential for majority party in Ohio to stop citizen-led activism and initiatives. So Issue 3 grants a monopoly, Issue 2 anti-monopoly amendment. These two clearly go together. So in Issue 2 invalidates Issue 3. And so Issue 2, notice, Issue 2 is from the state. This is legislatively referred constitutional amendment from the state legislature. Issue 3 is from the citizens. And so basically you have Issue 3 by the people being overridden by Issue 2 by the state. Here's the problem with that: the Ohio Constitution and our Bill of Rights. Issue 2 encroaches on the power of the people. And remember this Section 02 I told you I'd come back to. It says all political power is inherent in the people, and the government's instituted for their equal protection. It looks like Issue 2 is encroaching on that political power. Issue 3 by the people is being overridden by the state, taking power away from the people, contrary to Section 102 of the Constitution. Ian James, Responsible Ohio, called these titles absurd, abuse of partisan power. He said ballot issue titles and language are meant to be neutral, fair representation. Utilizing taxpayer dollars to lead a blatant attack to confuse voters is utterly shameful. And on this issue of being a monopoly, Chris Stock, a Cincinnati lawyer who helped write the amendment, said the initiative wouldn't produce a monopoly. These 10 facilities would operate independently, according to the Sherman Antitrust Act, to prevent collusion. There'd be no vertical integration from cultivation to retail of marijuana business. The RAND Corporation, a think tank in California, said it's not a monopoly, it's a structured oligopoly rather than a monopoly. And there are benefits to this system. Artificial scarcity makes the licenses valuable so that these 10 places have strong incentive to cooperate with regulators. So limiting the number of licenses makes monitoring easier. If there were too many licenses, a rogue company could more easily break the rules. So here are problems with issue 2. We already have antitrust laws in place, and apparently issue 3 meets those. There are 10 places. These 10 places aren't going to create a monopoly because there's a rampant black market that exists with plenty of other supply. And people can grow their own under issue 3. How can I have a monopoly and control something when people can grow it on their own? A monopoly means that there is no close substitute for a good or service provided, just by definition. But the black market gives plenty of close substitutes. So such control is not really a fear with legalization of marijuana. An oligopoly of 10 major marijuana plants, they're not going to be able to exert control. There's too much availability elsewhere in the black market. And these are more like a natural monopoly. So these 10 are really forming a sort of infrastructure, like a monopoly like electricity or gas, water, sewage, cable television, telephone. We have acceptable monopolies. And is this a real monopoly we're talking about? People are really stretching this term monopoly, making it mean a lot of things that I'm not sure we mean by that term. So here are monopolies: Microsoft, Motion Picture Association of America, Joint Commission, Monsanto, AAFEC, ES, and Google. So we have all these places and 10 pot production buildings in Ohio. They don't seem to belong with these others. Given this host of problems, it looks like this concern about new monopolies is a distraction. It has nothing to do with the real risks and benefits of marijuana. I suspect this is a red herring that's been introduced, or irrelevant reason. And a red herring is something that misleads or distracts from a relevant or important issue. It could be a logical fallacy, but it leads readers or audiences or voters towards a false conclusion. And so issue 2, this concern over new monopolies, it looks like something that misleads or distracts from a relevant or important issue, namely recognition of constitutional rights of marijuana-using adult citizens in Ohio. So in conclusion, we've taken quite a journey here, from telling you where I was coming from, the science, the brain and the plant, the truth about marijuana from Andrew Weil, New York Times advocating legalization of marijuana, the serious dangers of legal drug alcohol, the rights argument for marijuana legalization, the opponent, the moral conservative, and how the moral conservative's argument is overridden by the rights argument, protecting our children argument, and how legalization seems more in line with protecting children. Issue 3 and the current initiative in Ohio to legalize. Issue 2, which seems created to stop issue 3 and looks like and smells like a red herring. And here we are in the conclusion. So as I see it, every one of the reasons of the opponent of legalizing marijuana has been defeated. Hurts society. Even if you think it's going to hurt society and that it's going to hurt the environment if people are doing this in private, our liberty right in the Ohio Constitution trumps that minor external right on the part of the moral conservatives. And bad for individuals needs to be shown. Doesn't look like it's dangerous, leads us to our next point. It's not dangerous. 9%, the IOM says, 10 to 12%, I've been saying, become addicted to it. Versus tobacco, alcohol, cocaine, heroin, much higher rates. And just count the bodies if you want to say it's a dangerous drug. Compared to what? Certainly not alcohol. And so another major reason given is that it should be illegal. So why should it be illegal? Because it should be illegal. Well, that's begging the question. That's actually a fallacy. And so you can't give the same reason in your premise as you have in your conclusion. So you need a separate reason for why it should be illegal. And from the Colorado study, Netherlands, other places, it doesn't look like that it needs to be policed. Gateway drug. In the words of Andrew Weil, that is nonsense. And I showed you, every authority I show you says the gateway drug argument is a bad, fallacious argument. Marijuana use does not cause harder drug use. Bad for young people, as a reason, this is a reason for marijuana being illegal. So I agree it's bad for young people, but the law either allowing or prohibiting adult use of marijuana is not determining problematic adolescent use. Conduct disorders being unaddressed, and abuse of various kinds, marijuana using peers, lack of parenting. Those are what are leading to problematic marijuana use. And the final reason by the opponent of legalization, marijuana use should be illegal, but recreationally, but medicinal's okay. Well, at least you're finally acknowledging that medicinal's okay. But the Ohio Constitution guarantees this right of adult citizens in the state of Ohio to use marijuana. So that's just not enough. The essence of marijuana prohibition, avoid change at all costs. So moral majorities use the criminal law to punish harmless wrongdoing, to preserve their traditional way of life. And some who don't want to approve Issue 3, who don't want to approve legalization, they want to just wait. They need to know more. They need more information. Well, there's already ample evidence. It's safe. It has legitimate therapeutic uses. Look at all these testimonies. They count for something. Thoreau knows why this stalling and bureaucratic expediency is unacceptable. This is not how revolutions happen. Thoreau condemns these type of people who they resolve all civil obligation into expediency. This sort of assumes bureaucratic ignorance to the uses of marijuana, and the liberty argument can be defeated by action from principle. Action from principle, the perception and perception of the right, performance of the right, changes things and relations. It's essentially revolutionary and doesn't consist wholly of anything that was. So a vote for Issue 3, a vote for legalization of marijuana is an action from principle. It's an action to affirm the principles of equal rights and justice and liberty. Here's the bottom line. It's time for equal rights for marijuana users. It's finally arrived. Issue 3 is the formless remedy for this injustice is taking. Issue 2 has the stink of red herring. There are many serious issues with it. It's likely concocted to derail marijuana legalization. Morally, the equal rights argument just overpowers every other moral argument, especially with alcohol as the standard of what a society is willing to tolerate in its recreational drugs. Scientifically, no deaths ever. Low addiction, most graduate out of using marijuana, 10 to 12% become dependent. Low social harm, low individual harm. Reasons for legalization are strong. Medical benefits, many. Not as dangerous as other drugs. Benefits of regulation, tax revenue. Current enforcement, expensive, problematic, racist. And people should be able to do it if they want. The liberty argument, the Ohio Constitution. Here's the bottom line. We're in the midst of a heroin epidemic in Ohio. Wake up. This is a real way to help combat the heroin problem, and we're short on solutions right now. Alcohol is a destroyer. Anyone who is concerned about protecting children would do a hell of a lot more to vocally combat alcohol use. And if the law was really the way to protect children, then there should be more prohibitionists for alcohol than there are. And woe to you if you're an alcohol consumer and you're against the legalization of marijuana, against Issue 3, a hypocrite. Marijuana is originally found offensive because blacks and Mexicans were the users. The ACLU study shows possession arrest rates in Ohio are still racist in effect. Voting for Issue 3 ends the racism. And for me, it's been really exciting and an honor to suddenly find myself called upon to do my part to end unjust marijuana prohibition in the state of Ohio, to help so many adult marijuana users out there who don't have a voice. I pray the fight for equal rights is finally over. And it reminds me of this quote by Gandhi. They've ignored me, my 2009 book. They laughed at the 2009. They've laughed at this for 80 years. Then they fight you, and you get it on the ballot, and then you win. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. I appreciate your attention and attendance this evening, right on the brink of winning. Thank you. And please send your comments, questions, whatever, to stolick@finley.edu.